The vast emptiness of space lit up with flashes of green and blue. Laser beams cut through the darkness, leaving trails of light that faded quickly. Massive spaceships, each the size of a small moon, faced off against each other. This was the front line of the Great Galactic War. On the bridge of the largest ship, General Zork stood tall. His scaly skin shimmered under the dim lights, and his four eyes darted from one screen to another. Zork was a Draconian, a species known for their strength and military prowess. He had led the Draconian forces to victory in countless battles, and today would be no different. Status report. Zork's voice boomed across the bridge. His second in command, a smaller Draconian named Vex, hurried over with a datapad. General, our forces have pushed back the Zygonian fleet in sectors 7 and 9, Vex reported, but we're facing heavy resistance in Sector 4. Zork growled, a sound that made nearby crew members flinch. Sector 4. That's where those insect-like krill are fighting. How are they giving us trouble? Vex hesitated before answering. Sir, it seems they've allied with another species, one we haven't encountered before. This caught Zork's attention. In his centuries of fighting, he thought he knew every species in the galaxy. Show me, he ordered. A large holographic display flickered to life in front of them. It showed the battle in Sector 4. Zork could see the familiar ships of the krill, shaped like giant beetles. But fighting alongside them were sleek, smaller vessels that moved with incredible speed and agility. What are those? Zork asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and annoyance. We don't know, sir, Vex admitted. Our database has no match for their design or energy signatures. Zork watched as one of the unknown ships dodged a barrage of draconian fire, then countered with a precise strike that crippled a much larger vessel. It was impressive, and that made Zork angry. I want one of those ships captured, he ordered. Bring me their crew. I want to see these new allies of the krill for myself. Yes, General. Vex nodded and relayed the orders. For the next few hours, the battle raged on. Zork coordinated his forces, adapting strategies to counter the unexpected threat. Slowly but surely, the combined might of the Draconian fleet began to overwhelm the defenders in Sector 4. Finally, Vex approached Zork with news. General, we've done it. One of the unknown ships has been disabled and captured. We're bringing it into Docking Bay 3 now. A cruel smile spread across Zork's face, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Excellent. I'll go meet our guests personally. The general made his way through the massive ship, flanked by heavily armed guards. As they approached the docking bay, Zork could hear the sounds of a struggle. Good, he thought. He liked it when prisoners showed spirit. It made breaking them all the more satisfying. The doors to the docking bay slid open, revealing a scene of chaos. Draconian soldiers were surrounding a small group of aliens who were putting up a fierce fight. Zork's eyes widened as he got his first look at the unknown species. They were small, much smaller than he expected. They stood on 2 legs and had 2 arms, with soft-looking pink skin and fur on top of their heads. They looked weak, almost laughably so. But as Zork watched, he saw one of these small creatures knock down a Draconian soldier twice its size with a well-placed kick. Enough. Zork's voice thundered through the docking bay. Everyone froze, even the new aliens. They turned to look at him, and Zork was struck by the defiance in their eyes. He approached the group, towering over them. There were 5 of the strange creatures, all wearing similar uniforms. 4 of them were clearly injured, with cuts and bruises visible on their exposed skin. But the 5th, the smallest of the group, stood tall and unharmed. Zork focused on this one, assuming it must be their leader. Who are you? He demanded. What species are you that dares to challenge the Draconian Empire? The small alien looked up at Zork, showing no fear despite the massive size difference. It opened its mouth and made sounds that Zork couldn't understand. He gestured impatiently to one of his officers, who activated a universal translator. A Pete, "We are soldiers of the United Earth Alliance," the alien was saying. "We demand to be treated in accordance with galactic laws regarding prisoners of war." Zork laughed, a booming sound that echoed through the docking bay. "United Earth Alliance? I've never heard of it. And you, little one, you claim to be a soldier." He reached down and easily lifted the alien off the ground with one hand. "You're no bigger than a draconian child." The other aliens shouted in protest, struggling against their captors. But the one in Zork's grasp remained calm. "Size isn't everything, General," it said coolly. "I thought someone of your experience would know that." Zork's amusement turned to anger. He tightened his grip, but the alien didn't flinch. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit won't save you or your pathetic alliance. The Draconian Empire will crush you, just as we've crushed every other species that stood against us." The alien's response was unexpected. It smiled. "Many have said that about humans before, General. They all regretted it." Zork was about to respond when Vex rushed into the docking bay, looking panicked. "General, urgent news from the front." Annoyed at the interruption, Zork dropped the alien unceremoniously to the floor. "What is it?" he snapped. Vex glanced nervously at the captured aliens before leaning in to whisper to Zork. The general's eyes widened as he listened. He looked back at the small group of prisoners, seeing them in a new light. "Impossible," he muttered, but the evidence was clear. Somehow, these small, seemingly weak creatures had turned the tide of battle. In the short time since their capture, their comrades had launched a counterattack that was pushing back the draconian forces on multiple fronts. Zork turned back to the alien he had dismissed as weak. For the first time, he felt a twinge of fear. What did you say you were called?" The alien stood up, brushing off its uniform. Despite its small size, it suddenly seemed to fill the room with its presence. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Alliance," it said proudly, "and we humans are just getting started." As alarms began to blare throughout the ship, signaling a greater threat than Zork had ever faced, he realized that everything was about to change. The galaxy as he knew it would never be the same again. The era of human involvement in the Great Galactic War had begun. The mockery. Alarms blared throughout the massive draconian warship. The sound echoed off the metal walls, creating a cacophony that matched the chaos of the moment. General Zork, his green scales now pale with worry, barked orders to his crew. "Seal all airlocks. Prepare for potential boarding." His voice boomed over the noise. "And get those humans to the detention level immediately." As draconian soldiers hustled the captured humans out of the docking bay, Zork turned to his second-in-command. "Vex, tell me everything we know about these humans," he demanded. Vex's hands shook slightly as he consulted his datapad. "Not much, sir. They're new to the galactic stage. This is their first major engagement outside their home system. But reports from the battle suggest they're formidable." Zork snorted, a sound somewhere between disbelief and derision. "Formidable. Those tiny, soft creatures. Impossible." "And yet," Vex said cautiously, "they're pushing back our forces as we speak." The general's 4 eyes narrowed. "A fluke. Nothing more. Come, let's go see our formidable prisoners." As they made their way to the detention level, Zork's mind raced. In all his centuries of combat, he had never encountered a species like these humans. They seemed so physically unimpressive, and yet, the detention level was a stark, cold place. Force fields hummed, creating invisible barriers that held various alien prisoners. Zork strode past cells containing the insectoid krill and other known species until he reached the one holding the humans. The 5 human prisoners stood in their cell, looking surprisingly calm despite their situation. The one called Captain Sarah Chen stood at the front, her eyes meeting Zork's without fear. "Comfortable?" Zork asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Sarah shrugged. "I've had worse. The Arcturian slug pits were much less pleasant." Zork blinked in surprise. These humans had encountered the Arcturians, but he quickly covered his shock with a sneer. "I'm sure you'll find draconian hospitality far more lasting." He began to pace in front of the cell, looking at each human in turn. "I must say, I'm disappointed. When I heard about the new allies of the Krill, I expected more." He gestured at their small frames. "How can such weak creatures hope to stand against the might of the Draconian Empire?" One of the other humans, a tall male with dark skin, stepped forward. "Size isn't everything, big guy. Ever hear of David and Goliath?" Zork ignored the reference he didn't understand. Instead, he focused on the smallest of the humans, a young-looking female with red hair. "You," he pointed. "Step forward." The redhead glanced at Captain Chen, who nodded slightly. She moved to the front of the cell. "What's your name, little one?" Zork asked, his tone mockingly gentle. "Private First Class Emily O'Connor, United Earth Alliance Marine Corps," she responded crisply. Zork laughed, a booming sound that echoed through the detention level. "A Marine? You?" He turned to the other Draconians present. "Do you hear that? This tiny creature thinks she's a warrior." The other Draconians joined in the laughter, filling the area with their harsh, guttural sounds. Emily's face flushed red, but she held her ground, staring defiantly at Zork. "Tell me, little Marine," Zork continued, emphasizing the word with disdain, "what could you possibly do against a real warrior?" He flexed his massive, muscled arms. "I could snap you in half without breaking a sweat." Emily's voice was steady when she replied, "I was taught that a true warrior's strength lies not in their muscles, but in their mind and their heart." This elicited another round of laughter from the Draconians. Zork wiped a tear of mirth from one of his eyes. "Mind and heart. How quaint. In real war, little one, only brute strength matters." "Is that why we're kicking your scaly butts out there?" the dark-skinned human interjected. Zork's amusement vanished in an instant. He whirled to face the human who had spoken. "You dare?" "Yeah, we dare," Captain Chen said, stepping up. "Your brute strength doesn't seem to be doing much against our tactics and technology." Zork's face contorted with rage. He deactivated the force field and stomped into the cell, towering over the humans. To their credit, none of them flinched or stepped back. "You think your puny weapons and cowardly tactics make you strong?" he snarled. "Let's see how strong you are without them." He reached for Emily, intending to lift her off the ground as he had done before. What happened next occurred so fast that later, when reviewing the security footage, the Draconian analysts had to slow it down to understand the sequence of events. As Zork's hand came down, Emily moved. She sidestepped the giant alien's grasp, then used his own momentum against him. With a quick twist and a lever of her body, she sent the massive Draconian general flipping through the air. Zork crashed to the ground with a thunderous impact that shook the entire detention level. He lay there, dazed, staring up at the small human female who had just thrown him like a rag doll. The detention level fell silent. Every Draconian, every prisoner of every species, stared in shock at the scene before them. The mighty General Zork, terror of 1,000 worlds, laid low by the smallest, seemingly weakest of the humans. Emily stood over Zork, her voice quiet but clear in the stunned silence. "In the Corps, we have a saying. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. How's that for brute strength?" Zork struggled to his feet, his face a mask of confusion and growing fear. He looked at the humans with new eyes, finally beginning to understand that he had severely underestimated these strange creatures. Captain Chen stepped forward. "Now that we have your attention, General, perhaps we can discuss terms. This war doesn't have to continue." As Zork opened his mouth to respond, a massive explosion rocked the ship. Alarm klaxons, which had briefly silenced, began blaring again with renewed urgency. Vex's voice came over the ship's comm system, panic evident in his tone. "General, human forces have breached our defenses. They're boarding the ship. Zork looked at the small group of humans in the cell, their faces now sporting slight smiles. He realized, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that everything was about to change. The era of draconian dominance was coming to an end, and the age of humanity was just beginning. As the sounds of battle drew nearer to the detention level, Zork found himself facing a choice that would determine the fate of not just his ship, but possibly his entire species. And for the first time in his long life, the great General Zork was afraid. The revelation. The sounds of battle grew louder. Explosions shook the massive draconian warship, and the screech of tearing metal echoed through the corridors. In the detention level, General Zork stood frozen, his mind reeling from the events of the past few minutes. He had been humiliated by the smallest of the human prisoners. Now, human forces were invading his ship. Everything he thought he knew about warfare was being turned upside down. Captain Sarah Chen's voice cut through his confused thoughts. "General, you have a choice to make." And quickly. Zork's 4 eyes focused on the human captain. Despite being his prisoner, she spoke with authority. "What choice?" he growled. "Surrender now, or watch your ship and crew be destroyed," Sarah said calmly. "The humans breaching your defenses. They're our rescue team, and they won't stop until they reach us." As if to emphasize her point, another explosion rocked the ship. Closer this time. Vex's panicked voice came over the comm system again. "General, the humans have taken the engine room. We're losing power to all systems." Zork's mind raced. How could this be happening? How could his mighty warship fall so quickly to these tiny pink creatures? "Impossible," he muttered. "You're lying. This must be some trick." The tall, dark-skinned human stepped forward. "No trick, big guy. Just good old human ingenuity. While you were busy laughing at us, our team was hacking into your systems. Right now, they probably know this ship better than you do." Zork's eyes widened in shock. He turned to one of his officers. "Is this true? Check our systems." The draconian officer rushed to a nearby console. After a few moments, he looked up, his face pale. "Sir, all our firewalls are down. Our entire database has been copied. And there's some kind of virus spreading through our network." "A gift from Earth," Sarah said with a small smile. "We call it the Trojan horse. I'd explain the reference, but we don't have time for a history lesson." Zork's mind was spinning. In all his years of combat, he had never encountered an enemy like this. An enemy that could defeat him not just with weapons, but with information. Another human, a female with glasses, spoke up. "Your ship's schematics are probably being transmitted to every human and allied vessel in the sector right now. Your tactical advantage is gone, General." Zork slumped against the wall, the weight of this revelation crushing down on him. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How can you do all this?" "Because we're human," Emily, the small redhead who had thrown him, said simply. "We adapt. We overcome. It's what we do." Sarah nodded. "Throughout our history, humans have always faced bigger, stronger opponents. We learned to use our minds, to innovate, to find solutions where others saw only problems." The dark-skinned man chimed in. "We went from horse-drawn carts to landing on our moon in less than 70 years. We cured diseases that once wiped out millions. We've survived our own wars, our own mistakes. And now," the woman with glasses added, "we're here, in space, fighting for our place in the galaxy." Zork looked at each of the humans in turn. He saw no fear in their eyes, only determination. For the first time, he began to understand the true nature of the enemy he faced. "You're not just soldiers, are you?" he asked slowly. Sarah shook her head. "No, I'm a tactical expert. Jake here," she pointed to the tall man, "is our tech specialist. Emily is our hand-to-hand combat expert. Lisa, the woman with glasses, is our xenobiologist. And Mark, the final human who had been quiet until now, is our engineer." A team, Zork said, realization dawning. Each with different skills, working together. That's humanity in a nutshell, Sarah confirmed. We're not the strongest individually, but together, there's nothing we can't do. Another explosion, even closer now. The lights flickered ominously. Sir, Vex's voice came over the comm again. The humans have reached this level. They'll be here any moment. Zork straightened up. He looked at the human prisoners. No, not prisoners anymore. They were the victors here. He had underestimated them, mocked them. And now he was facing the consequences. If I surrender, he said slowly, what will happen to my crew? Sarah's expression softened slightly. We're not here to annihilate you, General. We want peace. If you order your forces to stand down, we'll guarantee their safety. Zork nodded slowly. He reached for his comm device. This is General Zork, he said, his voice echoing throughout the ship. All Draconian forces, stand down. I repeat, stand down. As soon as the words left his mouth, the sounds of battle began to fade. The constant explosions stopped. An eerie quiet fell over the ship. Moments later, the door to the detention level burst open. A team of heavily armed humans rushed in, their weapons trained on Zork and his officers. Captain Chen. One of them called out, "Are you all right?" Sarah nodded. "We're fine, Lieutenant." The general here was just about to discuss the terms of his surrender. The human soldiers looked surprised, then impressed. They lowered their weapons slightly. Zork watched this interaction with a mix of emotions. Defeat, certainly, but also curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, a glimmer of hope. "Before we begin," he said, drawing everyone's attention, "I have a question." He looked at Sarah. "You said you want peace. After all this, why?" Sarah smiled. It was a tired smile, but a genuine one. "Because that's also part of being human, General. We fight when we have to, but we always hope for peace." As Zork contemplated these words, he realized that his encounter with humanity had changed him forever. And perhaps, he thought, it would change the galaxy too. The great Draconian warship, once a symbol of unstoppable conquest, now floated peacefully in space. And aboard it, two very different species began the long, complex process of turning enemies into allies. The age of humanity had truly begun, and with it, a new chapter in galactic history was about to be written. The confrontation. The once bustling bridge of the Draconian warship was eerily quiet. Where there had been the constant hum of activity and the barking of orders, now there was only tense silence. General Zork sat in his command chair, his massive frame somehow looking smaller than before. Across from him, Captain Sarah Chen and her team stood tall, flanked by their rescue squad. "Well, General," Sarah began, breaking the silence. "I believe you wanted to know more about us humans. Now's your chance to ask." Zork's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of stress in Draconians. "Yes," he rumbled. "I have many questions. But first, tell me this. How did you defeat our defenses so easily?" Jake, the tech specialist, stepped forward with a grin. "That's my department, big guy. Your systems were impressive, don't get me wrong. But they had one major flaw." "And what was that?" Zork asked, leaning forward. "They were designed by Draconians," Jake said simply. "You think in straight lines. Brute force. We humans, we think around corners. While you were busy building bigger walls, we were finding ways to slip through the cracks." Zork frowned, his scaled brow furrowing. "But our technology is far advanced beyond yours. We've been a spacefaring race for millennia." Lisa, the xenobiologist, chimed in. "That's true, General. But sometimes being the new kids on the block has its advantages. We're not set in our ways. We're always looking for new solutions, new approaches. And we learn fast," Mark, the engineer, added. "Really fast. What took you centuries, we've achieved in decades." Zork shook his head in disbelief. It's not possible. No species can advance that quickly. Sarah smiled. General, let me tell you a little story about human history. Just over 100 years ago, we were still using horses as our main form of transportation. Within a single human lifetime, we went from that to landing on our moon. The draconian general's eyes widened. That's impossible. Emily, the combat specialist, finished for him. You might want to retire that word, sir. We humans tend to make the impossible happen on a regular basis. Zork stood up suddenly, his massive frame towering over the humans. But this time, none of them flinched. They had already proven they weren't intimidated by size. You speak of your achievements, Zork growled. But what of your weaknesses? Surely a species that advances so quickly must have great flaws. Sarah nodded, her expression turning serious. You're right, General. We do have flaws. We can be short-sighted, greedy, destructive. We've nearly wiped ourselves out more than once. Then how? Zork began, but Sarah held up a hand to stop him. Because every time we've stood on the brink of destruction, we've also found the strength to pull back, to learn from our mistakes, to be better. Jake nodded. We call it failing forward. Each setback teaches us something new. It's in our nature to question, to explore, to push boundaries. Lisa added, sometimes that gets us into trouble, but it's also what drives us to find solutions. Zork paced the bridge, his heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet room. And now you've come to the stars. To challenge races far older and more powerful than yourselves. We didn't come to challenge, Mark said. We came to learn, to grow, to be part of something bigger than ourselves. But we'll fight if we have to, Emily added, her voice firm. We've faced extinction before, General. We don't intend to face it again. Zork stopped pacing and turned to face the humans. You speak of peace, yet you've brought war to our doorstep. How do you justify this? Sarah stepped forward, meeting Zork's gaze unflinchingly. We didn't start this war, General. Your empire has been expanding unchecked for centuries, conquering and subjugating every race in its path. We simply decided to be the ones who said enough. And you think you can stand against the might of the draconian empire? Zork's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. We already have, Jake pointed out. Your flagship is under our control. Your database has been copied. Your tactical advantages are gone. But, Sarah added quickly, that doesn't mean we want to destroy you. As I said before, we want peace. Zork's eyes narrowed. Peace? After all this? Sarah nodded. Yes, General. Peace. Because that's another thing about humans. We're adaptable. We can go from enemies to allies in a heartbeat if that's what's best for everyone. And how would this peace work? Zork asked, his tone cautious but curious. Well, for starters, Mark said, we could share technology. There's a lot we could learn from each other. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. Cultural exchange programs, scientific collaborations. The potential is endless. Joint military exercises, Emily suggested. We could learn from your strength. You could learn from our adaptability. Zork looked at each of the humans in turn, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he sank back into his command chair. In all my years, he said quietly, I've never encountered a species like yours. You're infuriating, confusing, and he paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Impressive. Sarah smiled. We get that a lot. But, Zork continued, his voice growing stronger, you must understand. I am but one general. The empire is vast. Many will not accept this peace so easily. We know, Sarah said. We're prepared for a long road ahead, but every journey begins with a single step. This, she gestured around the bridge, this could be that step. Zork was quiet for a long moment, his internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he looked up at Sarah. Very well, Captain Chen. Let us take that step. Tell me more about your vision for peace. As the humans began to outline their ideas, the atmosphere on the bridge began to change. The tension slowly melted away, replaced by a cautious optimism. Outside the viewport, stars twinkled in the vast expanse of space. Somewhere out there, the fate of two civilizations, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was hanging in the balance. And on this draconian warship, an unlikely group of humans and one very surprised alien general were taking the first tentative steps towards a new future. The confrontation was over. The conversation, the real one, was just beginning. The consequences. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On countless worlds, beings of all shapes and sizes gathered around communication devices, eager to hear the latest updates. The unthinkable had happened. The mighty draconian empire had been brought to a standstill by a species previously unknown to the galactic community. Humans. The word was on everyone's lips, spoken with a mixture of awe, fear, and curiosity. On the draconian homeworld of Dracos Prime, the High Council was in an uproar. The massive chamber, usually a place of orderly debate, had devolved into chaos. Councilors shouted over one another, their scales changing colors rapidly in response to their agitation. Silence. The booming voice of High Councilor Zex cut through the din. As the chamber quieted, Zex turned to face the holographic image of General Zork. General, explain yourself. How could you surrender our most powerful warship to these humans? Zork, his image flickering slightly, stood tall. High Councilor, members of the Council, I made the only decision I could to save lives, both draconian and human. Save lives. Another councilor scoffed. Since when does the mighty draconian empire concern itself with saving the lives of inferior species? Zork's eyes narrowed. With all due respect, Councilor, the humans are far from inferior. They are, unlike anything we have ever encountered. As Zork began to explain the events that had transpired on his ship, the Council listened with growing disbelief. The humans' technological prowess, their adaptability, their unconventional tactics, it all seemed impossible. And now, Zork concluded, we stand at a crossroads. The humans offer peace, cooperation, and shared progress. I believe we should consider their offer carefully. The chamber erupted into arguments once more. Some councilors called for immediate retaliation, others for caution. A few, to everyone's surprise, seemed intrigued by the idea of peace. Meanwhile, light years away on the human colony world of New Terra, a similar scene was unfolding. The United Earth Alliance Parliament was in emergency session, discussing the unexpected turn of events. President Amelia Rodriguez stood at the podium, her voice calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, what Captain Chen and her team have achieved is nothing short of miraculous. They've opened a door to potential peace with the Draconian Empire. But can we trust them? A skeptical senator called out. The Draconians have a long history of conquest and subjugation. That's true, Amelia acknowledged. But history is not destiny. We humans should know that better than anyone. She gestured to a large screen behind her, which came to life with images of Earth's past, wars, environmental disasters, social upheavals. Our own history is far from perfect. Yet here we stand, reaching for the stars, offering a hand of friendship to those we once considered enemies. Back on the Draconian warship, now in a stable orbit around a neutral planet, General Zork and Captain Chen were deep in discussion. They sat in the ship's conference room, surrounded by both human and Draconian officers. Your High Council seems resistant to the idea of peace, Sarah observed. Zork nodded gravely. Change does not come easily to Draconians. We are a species set in our ways, proud of our long history. History can be a guide, Sarah said thoughtfully, but it shouldn't be a cage. We can honor the past while still moving forward. As they talked, a young Draconian officer named Kala listened intently. Unlike many of her peers, she found the humans fascinating rather than threatening. Their ideas about cooperation and mutual growth resonated with her in a way she couldn't quite explain. "General," Calla said, speaking up for the first time, "perhaps we could show the Council and our people the benefits of cooperating with humans in a tangible way." All eyes turned to her. Zork, intrigued, gestured for her to continue. "Well," Calla said, her confidence growing, "the humans have already accessed our database. Instead of seeing this as a breach, why don't we use it as an opportunity? We could set up a joint research project, combining our vast knowledge with human innovation." Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's a brilliant idea. We could start with something universally beneficial, like medical research or sustainable energy production." The room buzzed with excitement as humans and draconians alike began to build on the idea. For the first time, they weren't two separate species, but a single group united by a common goal. As the discussion continued, news of this potential collaboration began to spread. Across the galaxy, other species watched with a mixture of hope and trepidation. If the warlike draconians and the upstart humans could find common ground, what might that mean for the rest of the galactic community? On a small forgotten planet at the edge of known space, a group of refugees from various species huddled around a battered radio. As they listened to the news of possible peace between humans and draconians, a spark of hope flickered in their eyes. "Do you think," one of them asked tentatively, "that this could mean an end to the conflicts that drove us from our homes?" An older member of the group, wizened by years of hardship, smiled gently. "Perhaps, young one. If these humans can bring peace to the draconians, who knows what other miracles they might achieve." Back on the draconian warship, as the joint team of humans and draconians worked late into the night, General Zork found himself watching them with a sense of wonder. He thought back to his initial dismissal of humans as weak and insignificant. How wrong he had been. Sarah approached him, offering a cup of human coffee, a drink Zork had initially found bitter but was growing to appreciate. "Credit for your thoughts, General." Zork accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. "I was just thinking, Captain Chen, about the nature of strength. I spent my entire life believing that strength came from power, from the ability to conquer and subdue." He paused, looking out at the stars visible through the viewport. "But perhaps true strength lies in the ability to adapt, to grow, to turn enemies into friends." Sarah smiled. "That's a very human perspective, General." "Indeed," Zork rumbled, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Perhaps there's hope for us draconians yet." As they stood there, human and draconian side by side, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles yet to be overcome. But for the first time in a long while, it was also filled with hope. The consequences of this unexpected encounter between humans and draconians were only beginning to unfold. But one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same again. And just maybe, it would be better for it.